Thank you, Dr. Yuval Steinitz, and the message is very clear. Come and do deals here in Israel and take part in the Israeli innovation. And I would like to invite the first panel to the stage. The moderator is Robert Wolcott, Professor, Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University. Beth Comstock, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of General Electric. Jeffrey Swartz, former President and CEO of the Timberland Company. And Dr. Kenneth Stein, Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer, Boston Scientific.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in Israel. I must say this is my first visit to your country, but certainly a very, very long relationship between my organization, the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University in Israel. I don't know how many of you know this. Certainly the partnership between Rekanati and Tel Aviv University and the Kellogg School is fairly well known, but what you might not know is that was absolutely the very first international executive MBA partnership in the world. And it was struck by Dean Jacobs at the Kellogg School many years ago, along with the Dean of Rekanati at that time. So Israel has been a fabulous location for us, and I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks to Zeev Klein and Landmark and the whole group. But I also want to say thank you to my good friend Yitz Applebaum, who's here somewhere, who planted the seed for me to visit Israel a few years ago, and I've been eager to do so ever since. So thank you very much. We've got a fabulous panel with us today, and Beth and Ken and Jeff, as you might notice from the bios, are all from relatively large organizations. So here at this program, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs, investors seeking that individual researcher in a lab with the thing that's going to transform the world, investors seeking small startups, but we also have leaders of larger companies, people who are in corporate venture capital or seeking R&D opportunities in medical and industrial, consumer even. So I think what I'd like to do, we have a topic described for the panel which is really big, and that's innovation and globalization. I'm happy to say in the next 40 minutes we're going to actually cover the entire topic, so there's absolutely nothing else to learn about it by the end of that 40 minutes. Obviously that's not possible. So I'd like to bring the focus down a little bit. The focus that we're going to take is, let's talk a little bit about what is it like to drive innovation on a sustainable basis within a large, complex organization, which is very different than doing so in a small entrepreneurial firm. And then after that, I want to get down to the detail of how do we improve the interface between big companies, which we represent, and small companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and these kinds of ecosystems. It's a very different situation. I think when we do that, we're all going to be a lot happier. So with that setup, I'd like to open with a first question to my fellow panelists. And as the moderator, I'm absolved. I don't have to answer this question, thank goodness. But I asked them to think of a significant innovation success that they've been part of or witnessed at their own firm, something that really changed the game in some way. And what did you learn from it? What is the most important thing you learned from it in terms of how to make innovation happen? And you're not allowed to answer, it was a great product. Now, it might very well have been a great product, but that's not a good enough answer. There's always more than just, it was a great product. So with that, I'm going to throw the baton over to Jeff.
I have to say, it's really exciting to be included in the company of these esteemed leaders. When you talk about big companies, I think that's hysterical because our revenues at the peak were probably less than Beth's marketing budget, but that...
I work for GE, we're cheap.
Yeah, okay, well, it's exciting to sit with you. Look, I come from the outdoor industry, and innovation in the outdoor industry, when you try to make technical products for consumers who use them in real application. Innovation there is to make a product lighter or to make a product stronger, make a product more durable. Because when people go outside and they go hiking, they count on their gear. About 3 years ago, we set out to do something that was product-oriented, but the innovation that we tried, that we pursued, was the notion of how do you make the highest performing outdoor product on Earth in a way that's environmentally thoughtful. And they're not dissonant notions. They're almost absolutely it's almost a dichotomy. The way you make a hiking boot, what did I do wrong? Sorry. Thanks. I want one of the Madonna headsets like you. But that's okay. Yeah.
Only the moderator.
Only the moderator gets one of those. Yeah. Hi, Mom. Anyways, the way you make a hiking boot is you create a monstrous hybrid of materials. You weld them together forever because the product has to last forever. Yeah. To make an environmentally thoughtful product means you have to completely innovate the way you source materials. You have to change the way you manufacture a product. And environmentally thoughtful means that it performs every single day. And when you're finished with it, it can be disassembled effortlessly into materials that can be either reused or recycled. And so we set out 3 years ago to do this, and it was, look, it's not life-saving stuff like these other companies do, but in our industry, it was a challenging notion. It was something that you're not supposed to be able to do. Yeah. And it took us a long time to figure out how to do it. We made a spectacular product, and we sold none of them. So to be clear, this was a great product, and they loved it. But it was a huge innovation in terms of changing the way our industry would compete, in terms of the value of the products that we manufacture and we sell to consumers all around the world. You say, what did we learn from this process? The biggest single thing I learned from this was you got to make the people who are part of the process, the design team, the marketing team, the sourcing team, the manufacturing team, you have to make them understand not what you're asking, and it's not a question of how. The most important question that we spent time on at Timberland was why. If people understand why we're doing what we're doing, all of a sudden there is an opportunity to create new ideas and new connections that hadn't been thought of before. And so one very narrow example, when we talk about trying to make a product that is high performance and environmentally neutral, you have to put rubber on the bottom of a shoe. This is terribly important. You want to tell all your friends about this? It has to be rubber. But you know that the world is full of automobile tires and landfills. And so you can either tap virgin rubber the way everybody does in our industry, or you can figure out a way in the supply chain to invite technology that delinks rubber bonds, and automobile tires turn into high-performing rubber soles. It improved our gross margin because the raw stock was much cheaper. Environmentally, it was deeply impactful because every time we made a pair of shoes, we're taking a tire out of the landfill. There is no chance, none, that we would have got to that conversation if what we're focusing on was what or how. It was only by asking people to understand what the mission of the company was that allowed them to understand the role of values in building product, and that's what I learned from that process.
Well, Jeff, we're going to come back to that question later on about the mission and the culture of the company and all that, but your comment about understanding why is critical, and as we go through day-to-day life, we often miss that question, or we set it aside and think we know it, and we think our team knows it. I'll digress for just a second. At my program at Kellogg, the Kellogg Innovation Network, we have events around the country and the world. And at one of the events, we were in Silicon Valley at Cisco, actually, thanks, Carlos, at the Executive Briefing Center. And Bill Perry, the former Secretary of Defense of the United States, came down and spoke to us. And he had horrible slides, by the way. I mean, they were Times New Roman bullet point font, really horrible. But the content and the messenger were inspiring. It was one of the most extraordinary presentations, discussions. He just told stories. And one of the stories he told, quite modestly I might add, is during the Carter administration we had a big problem in Europe, and that was the Soviet Empire had overwhelming force superiority, conventional force superiority in Europe. And had the Soviet Union decided to roll its tanks across Western Europe, there was absolutely nothing we could have done at all. We had one choice, which was bomb or not bomb. Not a very good choice. So they had a major challenge, a big objective, a why. And he took his team to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and said, what do you got? We have to leverage what America's got, and that's technology. And they selected three things: smart weapons, smart sensors, and stealth. And he said to his team, get it done in 4 years. And we all know what happened with these things, especially stealth. It happened. So he ends this story, and I cut him off. I said, Secretary Perry, I hate to interrupt you, but I have to point something out. On one slide, in less than 40 words, you have the grand challenge, the strategy, and the terms of engagement that helped, it wasn't the only factor, but that helped to bring down the Soviet Empire. So I looked at my executives and I said, which one of your CEOs could articulate the strategy, the challenge, and the terms of engagement in less than 40 words on one slide? And they all slunk down in their chairs and checked their BlackBerries. The answer was pretty clear. So I think something about having a very clarity on mission and what you're really trying to accomplish and why is something we miss all the time. So, Beth, a big innovation. I know GE has a lot of them. They're all over the place. We see them. Sometimes we don't see them. What's a big success that you've experienced, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I'd say it's still a work in progress. It's a genre of innovation. A lot of people call it reverse innovation. I actually think it's innovation the way it should be. And what I mean by that is a big company, our job is to push the limits of science in healthcare and energy and in transportation. And so you tend to think globally at scale. You take a big product and you figure out how do you get it around the world. Or reverse innovation takes it on its head and says, let's actually innovate from the market back, which, as I said, I think is the way innovation should happen. And so we've been doing quite a bit of that in India and China. And I think in India in particular, it's proving to be a great laboratory and a success bed, especially in healthcare. A $500 heart monitor, a baby warmer that coming out of India costs $10,000, high-end hospital, $50,000. And basically what we've had to do is turn ourselves upside down to rally around the market and to marry technologists with marketers, to say, what's the market need? To go live at a Tier 3 hospital in India and say, hey, there's interrupted power throughout the day. Power is a big issue. The way the baby's accessed, to really understand the applications and the need, and then to take that and realize that cost is a great amplifier of innovation. I think for too long we've thought cost limited the quality of technology. In fact, it's just the opposite. The great innovation is saying, how do you target the best technology? Emerging markets won't accept inferior technology. So it's really about saying fewer features, but the right. Best features targeted for the right application. And as I said, I'm very excited at what it's doing in healthcare. And I think for a company like ours, it's changing how we look at energy. I think there are a lot of opportunities we're starting to incubate in distributed energy. So I'm very excited. We're learning a lot. There's a lot of mistakes along the way, but I'm very excited about sort of a suite of efforts that are coming out of that.
Well, Beth, I want to continue actually in this direction for a second, because I was actually going to pose a question to you after this round, which was, why the heck are you here? I mean, let's be honest. This is a technology conference, and your title has marketing in it. But you sort of preempted me on that. So go a little bit deeper. What is the role of marketing? And I don't mean the marketing department, the Marcom people who are sending stuff to the ad agency, but what is the role of marketing with a big M in driving innovation at a firm like GE?
Yeah, well, I think the role of marketing in any organization is twofold. It's about value and innovation. It's understanding what customers in the market value and then innovating. And I know in many companies we grew up with marketing being the advertising team, the sales support, and those are critically important. But marketing's got to be about the market. And that's where we've spent a lot of time in investing. It's strategy, it's innovation. It's understanding the usability of something. It's understanding where the customer intersects with the need. To me, really, marketing is about understanding the need and then translating it back to the company. I think that's been a big leap in our company, honestly. Like many of you here, we're a technology company. 130 years, started by this guy named Thomas Edison, who was a great inventor. He was also
who was that exactly?
A little guy you may have heard of, Thomas Edison, but he was a great marketer because he understood you can't just sell a light bulb. You have to have a whole system to support electricity. And that's what marketing's about, creating. Yeah. So our teams are as much about developing markets, understanding trends, and that's been a leap of faith in a technology company where you want so much to just lead with the technology. Right. And trust me, sometimes that's what you have to do. We have the best technologists. I wouldn't trade them for anything. But part of the tension you have to create is understanding there's a spectrum of innovation. And maybe the innovation is the business model. Right. Maybe you have the best technology, but you need a new way of selling it, a new way of combining technologies, of targeting needs. So that's where we've spent a lot of the last decade trying to expand our definition of innovation and to include much more market acceleration and how we see the market to intersect with the technology. So
a question I want to come back to, and I'll let you noodle on it a second. I know you have a lot of experience with this. What you just said all sounds great. Perfect. Let's go to lunch. I mean, but it's obviously a lot harder than just saying, oh, we need to go talk to the customer, because when you go to the technology teams, to the engineers, and you do have some of the best on the planet in this, and you say, we really need more customer insight, what do they often say? Well, they say, oh, well, we already talk to the customer. We talk to the customer all the time. And to be fair, people in companies in marketing and sales and other, we talk to the customer every day. But is that necessarily true customer insight? Is that necessarily what's going to lead to that new business model Because are they going to tell you, what if you were to transform the entire way that we pay you? That's unlikely to come from your customer. It might happen, but often unlikely to come from your customer. So, Ken, a big innovation success, and what did we learn from it?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a story that's actually probably pretty appropriate for this meeting, and maybe 3 lessons that I draw from it, which may or may not be on point with what we were just talking about. And talk about the invention and the commercialization of the automatic implantable cardioverter defibrillator. And so this is a device that turned into one of the single largest markets in the med tech industry. And it's an implantable device like a pacemaker, monitors the heartbeat, the patient has a cardiac arrest, gives a shock to the heart, resuscitates the patient, saves literally hundreds of thousands of lives a year. It was invented by a man named Michel Morawski. And Michel was a Polish Jew, Holocaust survivor, emigrated to Israel, did his medical training in Israel, where his mentor died of a cardiac arrest, and he made it his life's mission to develop a machine that would cure cardiac arrest. Ended up then getting additional training in Mexico, moved to Baltimore in the U.S., where he built this device. And Michel was literally, not figuratively, literally laughed off the stage at medical conferences when he first presented his invention. Tried to commercialize, tried to sell the invention to some of the largest competitors in our space who dismissed him with really very curt letters, and eventually came to a very small company called CPI, Cardiac Pacemakers Incorporated, which eventually, through process of merger and acquisition, became part of Boston Scientific, where the idea was picked up and turned, again, over a period of time into this huge success. And what are the lessons? I mean, I think the lessons are threefold. And the first is the one where, maybe we get into a little bit of this issue of how much you learn from your colleagues in marketing, right? Which is, so this met a clear need, and yet everyone who looked at this idea, with very few exceptions, thought that it was foolish. All right? I mean, I can remember when I was in medical school reading descriptions of this idea and thinking that this was the most idiotic thing I'd ever heard of. And so I think truly innovative ideas always look foolish to the majority, and the key is deciding which things look foolish because they are foolish versus which things only look foolish but are truly groundbreaking. I think the second thing is so the success of the defibrillator was not one innovation; it was a series of innovations. Mm-hmm. All right? Because we don't use today the device that Morawski originally invented. His device was large, had to be implanted in the abdomen, required open heart surgery to implant. And the true success took that idea, but then required iterative changes to it till you get to the point where this can be implanted through a minimally invasive approach. And so that willingness to plan on the continued R&D burn, right, to refine the idea, I think is necessary. And you have to sort of look at the initial germ of a concept and say, okay, it has limitations, but we can plan on overcoming these limitations. And then I think the third lesson, and to me, given what I do, one of the key lessons is, the real key to the commercial success of this was not only having the product, and right, we can't talk about just having good product. Good product's foundational. But then a bit of luck and a bit of good planning in taking that product to the right academic partners and doing the right clinical trials to get the actual data that enables me to sit here and say these devices do save lives. And again, if we hadn't had the willingness to invest in that clinical trial portfolio, this would have just been a good idea, but never ever would have been the success that it is.
Well, Jeff, I want to build on that. In your industry, unlike almost any other in the world, the time from hypothesis, scientific hypothesis, to marketable product or service is incredibly long, complicated, expensive, and high risk. What sorts of things does a company like Boston Scientific do? How can you add value to researchers, investors, et cetera, in the earlier stages, before M&A, way before we get to the point where, hey, here's your check? I mean, what can we do together with Boston Scientific to help them grow and go through that draconian process a little better?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a very nice way of saying, okay, Ken, so what are you really good at, if anything? and so, you know, what are our competencies, right? So I mean, we do have some very strong engineering competencies. And, you know, within implantable microelectronics, within stents, minimally invasive approaches, I think we can partner with people who have ideas, and at least, you know, so that people aren't always reinventing the wheel, at least go through the things that we understand. And you know, you have a device that's so big with microelectronics, we can tell you, you know, we can probably shrink it down 65%, and oh, by the way, get you a battery that lasts twice as long. So I think there are technologies where we have a lot of internal competency, where a lot of startups might not. And I think it's certainly, again, in everyone's interest, not for everyone to be reinventing the wheel. I think second, you know, where we are, again, I believe very strong, is in understanding regulatory framework, regulatory approaches, and then clinical trials. When you get to the point where you need to run large-scale, pivotal size, you know, 1,000, 2,000 patient clinical trials, again, that ought not to be within what a startup should be doing. It is what a company like us should be doing.
So, Beth, I'm going to throw a version of this question at you. GE is a fairly large company. And if I had a startup with 5 people and I was looking for a partner, I wouldn't even know where to start. And I'll share a brief anecdote. And early in my career, a friend of mine, I was a PhD student at the engineering school at Northwestern, and he was an engineer in another one of the silos there at the engineering school. And he had a startup, and he was all excited. He had found a guy, a neighbor of his parents, who was a vice president in a big company. And he said, I had a meeting with this guy, and boy, he was so excited. He said, he's going to put my project on fast track. And I said, oh, wow, that's great, Jim. You know, so what does that mean? He said, well, I don't know. I think it's going to take a couple months, and we'll have a deal. And I said, oh, well, maybe, but maybe not. Why don't you find out if fast track is actually a term of art inside that company? And he said, well, okay. He came back later, and he said, yeah, fast track just means that it doesn't have to go through the annual budget cycle. So it wasn't just going to be a contract in a month. So how does a small organization approach GE? How does it know how to explore working with a company like yours?
It's a good question, and I think it's something we've been addressing over the past few years. It is hard to go to a big company. First of all, there are many doors to open, many people who you can interact with. I think we've created a couple things. Here in Israel, we've created a great sort of innovation hub out of our research lab that his whole job is to intersect with entrepreneurs.
How long has that been around?
It's been in the past year. It's really just celebrated a year. Oded's here who leads it. It's a great effort, and I think you're going to see more of that. We've had over the past decade equity funds, which are great ways, but sometimes that's not enough. And so what we've tried to do is expand the way we interact with startups. I think it starts with a company recognizing that no matter if you're big, you still don't have all the answers. That the problems that companies like ours deal with are just too big for any one industry, any one company to solve alone. Healthcare, energy. I mean, I don't care who you are, government, company, you can't solve it alone, and you don't have the best technology. So you have to come to that humility, I think. And you have to try different models. Equity, shop here in Israel. We've also done quite a bit around open innovation, where we've said, hello world, give us your best business plans. And out of that come, again, it's a great way for a startup that would know we're not going to invest in them, they're not in Israel. How do they get into GE? Okay, you're in Australia and you have a great idea for smart grid, come into our challenge. We had 5,000 entries, so you had to go through a lot. But even that sometimes isn't good enough. And so we're starting to invest in efforts internally to accelerate partnerships with startups. So it's not enough to just give you money. It's not enough just to say, here, let me introduce you to another GE business. How can we actually fund a pilot project? Take you to a customer? So I'd say for big companies, you have to invest time to work differently. And for small companies, honestly, you hate to be the first development startup. So you ought to ask, have you ever done this with a big company before? I don't want to say run, but be prepared to know that the first one is the hardest one. And then, find out, sort of spend some time, and you need to find groups where they're going to help shepherd your idea. And so I think a lot of us, Carlos is here from Cisco, a lot of us are investing in these kind of resources now.
Yeah, I'm seeing this as a trend, and I would highly recommend to all of our big company colleagues here in the room is if your company does not have a small, dedicated, it probably should be small.
It has to be small.
A small, dedicated team to interface between smaller entrepreneurial organizations, researchers, et cetera, and your company, the big complex entity you are, you need to get one. And corporate venture capital is great, as you mentioned, and the R&D team, they're going to be out in the field, et cetera. But that's not enough. These are Sherpas. These are people whose full-time job it is to not only know where the startups are and the exciting technology, but they can prep that entrepreneur when they go into the big company and say, look, Beth loves this stuff, but man, don't talk to Ken. He hates this.
Yeah, and give it
avoid
money.
Ken, yeah, and say, look, this is a great presentation, but if you give this presentation to Beth, she's going to kick you out of the office. Prepare the entrepreneur, be that interface between the two. So that's great. So I want to segue now from this notion, which has something to do actually with culture in a weird way, with the culture and the objective of the company, and ask Jeff a question. You're very well known worldwide as a proselytizer for the notion of the role of business, mission, purpose, all of these things. And I followed your work for some time, conscious capitalism and all that hoo-ha stuff. And it's pretty exciting when you see the performance that can come from having that kind of a focus. And in your experience, you went from when you joined Timberland, you were $100 million a year, and when you sold it recently, you were $1.8 billion in revenue. So this is pretty significant growth in anybody's book. How do you nurture and maintain the right kind of culture at a company that's growing at that rate?
I don't know how successful we were at it, but I can tell you how we worked at it for what it's worth. I think that I'm the son of an entrepreneur. I'm a third-generation guy. It was a family business, and so it wasn't hard for me to remember what purpose was, because we'd confronted around the Passover Seder table, because Mom would tell you she didn't like the advertising or whatever it was. There was a return to first principles on a very regular basis, and to me the power of that is the question, right? It's not the answer. It's, are you thinking about first principles as you operate your business? There's what you do and how you do it, and one can be so involved in how you do what you do, and the amount of task that confronts any entrepreneur is staggering, right? Yeah. There's too much to do, and so the question that it's easy to let go of is, why am I doing this, or what's the purpose of this struggle? What am I trying to do? We were a publicly traded company in the New York Stock Exchange, and so it would be easy to give purpose back to the sort of faceless Wall Street conversation. Purpose is to make the quarter's earnings. Right. And it becomes a wonderful way to give away whatever purpose you have and to let others set the agenda. And it's actually a tremendously comforting thing to do. But it's, at least in my experience in our family's business, every time we laid back against an external standard like that, yeah, we found that we were off our mission. And so mission wasn't about making a speech. Mission was about asking a question, which is, what problem are we trying to solve? What's our purpose? Why are we doing what we're doing? And the hardest thing for me in 30 years working there was to ask myself the question, what's my role in that conversation? Because I used to be really good at some of the technical things that needed doing, and I was really comforted about doing the things I knew how to do well. But as our company grew and as our challenges changed, never as complex as you described, but we compete in the global economy, it was clear it wasn't going to be who's the best shoe salesman. The question for the leader became, what questions are we having a conversation, but who's participating in the conversation and what is being asked? And so I watched even my travel pattern change. I traveled more hours in the later years at Timberland, and I spent less time with customers. I spent more time with the internal team. So I'd go to Paris, and I'd see a customer if I had to. Not that I didn't want to, but the principle was sit with the team and have the conversation in a retail way. Why are we doing what we're doing? Conversation about first principles. And the day comes to an end, and you think, what did I accomplish? But what you accomplished was you recentered the conversation with the people who are really supposed to be about innovation, people who can deliver the kind of value that the shareholder will ultimately applaud. The only way to ensure that was to make sure you have this constant conversation about why and about mission.
So there seemed to be a conflict. I guess, in terms of spending time with customers, who are obviously critical to any company, spending time with the internal team, focusing your time as the leader on coaching and motivating, etc. We only have so much time in the day, and it sounds like you emphasized spending the time with the team.
It was an awkward transition because I was good at...
So this is something you didn't think of at the beginning, but you grew into it.
Well, actually, the power of our team was I was heading out for make a customer call, and somebody said, if we need you to do that, we'll let you know. Right? The truth of the matter is we're paying lots of folks to do this, and they do it. Actually, my French is really spectacular, but not quite as good as the French sales guys, right? And after I insulted people 3 times with the wrong French word, they said, why don't we spend more time in the office talking about what purpose is, and then let us release our energy. Yeah. Release our energy was the conversation. And right. So I was sort of directed back by our team, which was powerful.
Right. Merci beaucoup. So, Beth or Ken, any thought about this? What your role as leaders and your different roles in the organization, but you both have leadership roles in terms of generating that culture of innovation within the firm.
Well, in terms of generally, because I was saying just in terms of maintaining the culture in healthcare. So it's 2 words. It's meet patients.
Say again.
Meet patients.
Meet patients.
Yeah. Don't just sit in your office. You know. So our company mission. Right, you should be able to state it succinctly. Right, it's to prolong life and improve life through minimally invasive approaches to therapy patients with disease. But so the key is we don't treat disease; we treat people with disease. All right, and it's so we get every employee in the company an opportunity to meet patients whose lives have been touched by our devices, and that keeps you focused on what's important. Right, and what's important is the people who are going to get our therapies, and getting out and seeing how our products get used in the real world, getting to different hospitals within the U.S. across the world is the best education I think you can have in terms of really understanding what you can do, but also what you can't do with our existing technology.
I want to tie your meet patients and your purpose of business and why are we doing this to a quick story about a fellow who came to Kellogg last year, and we wrote a teaching case about his program. It's really gave was he says don't try and exert authority directly. Let the mission speak for you. So he took me out on a tour of some provincial hospitals and care clinics, and one of the first thing he did, we went to a small hospital, the pediatric care unit. And he said, before we start, let's go out into the unit. And we walked around this pediatric care space, and you can imagine what that experience felt like. And he said, you know, I did that on purpose because every time I bring an organization, an NGO leader who comes and they've got their $1 billion and they're ready to tell us how we're going to do things, I take them through this first, and then we sit down and have the meeting. And the whole conversation is different. So meet the patient. Beth, I want to come back to, this is a good segue back into this question about how do you get those horrible, those darn engineers, those brilliant people who are going to build the best mousetrap, and how do you reinvigorate the question of understanding customer insights and knowing that we have to go a couple levels deeper. And it's not just the engineers, it's the marketing people, it's the finance people, it's everybody. We have to recognize we have to go another step deeper. How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, Ken said it. I think you have to get people out of their offices, first of all. It's really getting an intact team together. I think it's not one or the other. It's not marketing's better than engineering, sales knows the customer best. It's everybody together. And they have to go and understand what the need is. I get a lot of conversation with engineers. Well, they'll be like, well, Steve Jobs never asked anybody what he wanted. And I usually go, well, let's face it, neither you nor I are Steve Jobs, so that may be a unique case, but the reality is we're not asking them what they want. We're understanding how they use what they use, what their needs are, and translating it. So there's something very powerful in a shared collective insight together. Mm-hmm. So I think that's critical. A lot of times, honestly, engineers just haven't been invited to spend time with customers. Right. Yeah. And I find it's very exciting for
sometimes
engineers.
They're told not to.
No, exactly.
They said, stay away from my customer, which blows me away.
It's crazy. And so when engineers and marketers and salespeople are together, it's like a collective, wow. Yeah. We're trying to do a lot more of that. We're opening customer innovation centers right now in Canada and China exactly to do that, to sort of create both a physical and a virtual melding. The other thing I think you have to do is you have to prioritize these things. You know, in big companies, what matters gets measured. And so you have to create, like we've created a protected class of ideas that the chairman of the company owns that forces engineering and marketing together to say what are those needs, how are you investing in it, are you really, and creating internal entrepreneurs and saying this really matters, that we're taking a risk on this market, that we're trying an energy storage business when we don't know anything, or we know a lot about the technology, but we don't know this market. So I think it's a combination of getting people into the market and prioritizing innovation and prioritizing insights. It's not just you got to spend time with the customer, but sometimes you need people who can extract those insights.
Yeah. So GE is doing some really interesting experimentation with the notion of intentionally creating and engaging those ecosystems and trying to look more broadly and bring variety of people in at different settings to enhance your innovation teams.
Partnering is very, very hard. It's hard to partner with your customer. And it's hard to partner when you bring other people to the equation. But again, it's a perfect place for startups to start to create value for a big company, because again, we know we don't have all the answers. And so with customers and a startup, even a government and academic organization, it's a lot to organize, but you start to see real value there.
So obviously it's going to take some cultural change inside our companies. It's going to take some procedure and process. I mean, if the legal department has to show up with a complicated NDA every time we're going to do, and I'm signing away my third kid, every time we're going to do something, it's not going to work. Yeah. But a last question I want to ask, and then we'll conclude, sort of to throw a bomb in the middle of the room, I guess. If we always focus on the successes, which we tend to like to do, then we really don't learn the lessons God sent us here to learn. And so I want to ask, think of a failure. Think of something that just, man, that did not go the way we had hoped. What did we learn from that failure? And briefly share that. Anybody can jump in, and not everybody is required to answer. So.
We have so many failures, it's sort of hard for me to pick one. But
your portfolio of failures.
A failure of concept, maybe more than a single product. Yeah. And so I talked about how successful the defibrillator has been. Our latest model of defibrillator, just released in the U.S., been out CE mark for over a year now, has over 350 different programmable parameters. I can tell you as a doc, all right, the likelihood that as a user I'm going to understand and be able to appropriately program every one of those 350 different programmable parameters is nil. And if you, again, as a doc, you expect me to live in a world, we would be very happy if everyone only used my products, but they don't. So they've got my competitor's product with their 350 completely different parameters, and a third competitor with their 350, and so no one can be expert with it.
By the way, Ken, I think Microsoft has a character that I think he was called Clippy. You could probably use Clippy to solve that problem.
And so what that has created for the industry is a huge service burden, where we in industry have to provide an overwhelming amount of technical assistance to the physicians who use our products. And so I think the failure there is mistaking sophistication and complexity. Yeah. And you get into this sort of cadence battle where you have to keep adding features because that's what people want. And I think the lesson is, and it's exactly what Beth said, there's a huge difference between going out and asking what people need versus what they want. Yeah. And if you only give people what they want without focusing on what they need, you can end up going down a path that looks great as you start down the path, but when you reach the end of the path, you're nowhere near where you want to be.
Great. Beth, any thoughts?
This is kind of a punt, but it comes back to GE. I think in the healthcare space in general, GE and our competitors, for a while we got in a big race about, look at CT, MR, especially take something like CT scanners. It's 34 slice. No, it's 64. No, we got in a huge technology capability race, and we didn't help the industry at all. Yeah. And we got very close as an industry to risking commoditizing this amazing, awesome technology. And I certainly think we've each found our way. I know for us it's been around really focusing on the application, the feature, cardiology versus oncology. And even things like you're seeing, for us, things like extremity MR, which goes, your head, your arm. So starting, again, it's of course you'd expect me as a marketer to say this, but understanding the need and the application. But you see this in too many industries where you lose sight, and it's one-upsmanship in technology, and sometimes even the customer's like, why do I need this?
Right. Jeff, final thought?
I thought we were out of time. The ecosystem point to me is the biggest pain point that I'm living with, having sold the company, now being out of the industry. The how do you galvanize an industry to do something that is broadly valuable? So 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we took this notion, food always is labeled, right, with a nutrition label, arguably valuable, but at least it's an attempt to have a conversation with the consumer about not what you do, but how you do it. And in the fashion industry, where we use global supply chains that are exploiting low-wage environments all over the world, they're using toxic materials in the construction of their products that are not transparent in terms of what they do. We took the view that it would be an incredible act if our industry didn't rely on government, but we worked together to create a standard that we could have a conversation with consumers about. And we spent, I don't want to tell you how many trillions of hours trying to have these conversations about corralling other folks. And we didn't get into one-upsmanship, we got into one-lessmanship. And so in the end, we put a nutrition label on our products. It was a defiant signal to consumers that this is the standard you should expect. It was kind of like the last thing you say before you walk off the stage. And so Timberland products have a nutrition label. It's relevant because Nike products don't. And so when you go to the point of sale, there's no way to compare the two. And so it's like a hollow gesture. It wasn't one that galvanized the kind of change that an industry should be able to deliver to its consumer. And so what do you learn from that failure? The self-contained team of marketing people and engineers and product experts, that's one set of challenges. The next set of challenges is to group together the groups to work in a real ecosystem with people who are predators and prey, people who have different outcomes that they desire. It's a model for social change, and it's a model for industrial behavior that's just not what, at least from our narrow little backward industry, it didn't get developed enough. And the net is that we leave real value on the table for consumers and for other stakeholders. It's a failure that afflicts.
Please.
Rob, one other thought. I think at big companies sometimes we run the risk of coming close, we fail to fail. And I think this has been a pet peeve of mine. I'll often ask our teams, give me your failure. I want to understand it. We want to do sort of autopsies of failures. It's hard to get people comfortable in companies or any company, but it's hard. So you need a culture and an imperative from a CEO often that just says, I'm going to recognize this failure, and it's hard to do.
But Beth, it's not only failure. I remember one of the teams, we won't say any details, but we're working with a GE, and we said, hey, you've got the opportunity to talk to Jeff Immelt, the CEO, and half the 6 teams or so were really excited and energized. The other half said, well, wait a minute, we don't have all the answers yet. Well, that's actually kind of the point, that's
what he wants to talk
through
about.
The process of what are the issues.
Wrong?
Right, exactly. How can I help?
Yeah.
So, well, I regret that we have to turn off the tap here because this has been a fabulous discussion, but every time I do these, I learn things, and I such esteemed people, it's humbling. Jeff, you talked about what is my role and how that changes over time. I think it's a question we should always stand back and ask. Role in the company, role in the world, role in the family, the role in the country. Clarity about why we're doing the things we do. That's certainly related to, Ken, your observation. Go out and meet the patient. Whoever the patient is in your context, make sure you're connected. You can't understand that mission. You can't figure out the insights without being immersed in what's going on and come up with the right want versus need. And is it really complexity that's going to add the value, or is it really serving whatever the fundamental need is that needs to be served? And Beth, you talked a lot about that in terms of value. And I think to find the value, to find the insights, you mentioned the term humility earlier on. And big companies, especially the ones that are recognized as the best, GE, Procter & Gamble, you can make your list. It's hard to say, you know what, maybe we don't have all the answers. Maybe there's somebody else out there knows this better than we do. And in conclusion, it reminds me of Phil Kotler and I wrote an article trying to understand the relationship between marketing and R&D, and we realized through this process that the role of the technologist is to be master of the art of the possible. What could possibly happen in the world that doesn't violate the laws of physics, of course, and even there we'll play with it sometimes. But that doesn't tell us what's valuable, what people might actually pay for or want or need. The role of marketing, and we're not saying the marketing department, but the role of this thing called marketing is to be master of the art of the valuable. And when we can put both value and possible together, that's when we have extraordinary power. Thanks a lot to the panelists, and thanks a lot to you for your time. Great. Well done.